Okay, so this is my first podcast that I'm doing. So in this podcast, I'm meeting with Erin, who's a friend of mine from working at summer camp. And things that I know already going into this, I know she works in the production side of theatre in Los Angeles. I don't really understand what that involves or know much about it. So it's just going to be a conversation where I find out a bit about how you get into that kind of work and what doing that job actually entails. So I hope you enjoy, and we'll get started straight away. Welcome to So What Do You Do All Day? Would you like to introduce yourself and what your job is?
Sure. I'm Erin. I'm Sam's friend from camp. I spend my days as a production manager in the regional theater industry.
Okay, and so for people who have no idea what those words actually mean, what is that?
Yeah, most people have no idea what that means. So essentially anytime you go to see a live theater, Broadway, the West End, any kind of national tour production of a show, there is a person whose job it is to make sure that the actual development of the show and any physical attributes on stage, so the costumes, the lighting, the sound, the set, any automation, if it rains on stage, any of that fun stuff, make sure that all happens on time and in budget. And we're also the people that deal with all of the labor to make sure that happens. So all the physical part, but also the labor to make those things happen and get them installed and running smoothly for the entire show.
So if I understand that correctly, so you don't deal with so much kind of like the acting side of it, it's the kind of the people who are making it all happen. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So I interface with the actors very minimally. Most of what I do, most of my work happens before the show even opens. It's a lot of the pre-production and putting everything in the building and getting it looking the way it's supposed to, so that when the actors show up, they have a thing to act on and interact with. And the people that I manage are essentially everybody that's not an actor is under my purview.
Okay. So I guess like in my head, when I think of kind of like stage shows and stuff, like because I guess I would be more familiar with the acting side of it. Like in my head, it sounds like really kind of like unstable kind of work, as in like sometimes you're in a show because you got cast and sometimes you didn't. But I imagine your work is more like you stay at the same place and do the kind of the same thing all the time. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's different ways you can do it. So there are production managers that are freelance and they move from space to space and show to show. That is more like acting, where you have to get hired for that show. But my particular job is I work at Center Theater Group in Los Angeles, and I work at that company. So anytime that company does a show, which we have 3 theaters, so we're constantly doing shows except for during pandemics, I am on a show. So I'm like a salaried position who works for the company, and that is what I happen to do. So for me, it's much more stable with the position that I chose.
Okay. So obviously you're at the point now where you're managing most of the people who are involved. Like, what did you kind of start off as once you actually got into the industry?
Yeah, so it was a fast and terrifying transition into production management. I started in theater as a wee tiny person, as many do, doing singing and dancing and all of that fun stuff, and loved it and still do. But I did robotics in high school. And so when I went to undergrad, it was like I wanted to go to a place that I could do engineering and also do performing. And through that, I eventually realized that technical theater existed and that all of the pieces that I'm actually interested in making the things to make theater versus to be the person that's the actual storyteller, more of the story maker part of that. So I transitioned into technical theater. I was a carpenter and a welder for a long while, doing shows, doing work both at the undergraduate level and at the regional theater level. I eventually got into more and more leadership positions, specifically at my undergrad, because it was a great acting program that did a lot of theater shows, but did not have a lot of tech theater students. So if you became a tech theater student, you did almost every show. So by my senior year, I was scenic designing a giant production, main stage production, and I was technical directing, and essentially production managing as well, a circus production, since we had a circus program at my undergrad. And it was a wild time. And I realized through those experiences that I was sick of losing money and time on a show because people couldn't talk to each other properly.
Mm-hmm.
I've sat in meetings where the designer and the director are arguing, but they're saying essentially the same thing and don't realize it. And where I've sat in meetings where the director and the designer agree on things when they're actually saying completely different thoughts, which doesn't help anyone in the long run.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a fairly universal thing. I think you come across that in pretty much any job you're in. But yeah.
Yeah. And so I eventually figured out that production managers are the ones who help facilitate those conversations and manage the budget, manage the people to make the thing happen. So I went to grad school, and I went in the program I was doing. I spent half my time doing carpentry and welding, a lot of welding that year, for the Yale Repertory Theater in New Haven, Connecticut. And then the rest of my time I spent taking graduate level classes at the Yale School of Drama. It's a phenomenal program. And I essentially just took a bunch of classes in production management and technical direction. They can go hand in hand quite easily. So technical directors are the people who, when the scenic designer says, it looks like this, the technical director is the one that looks at it and says, okay, and this is how we build it. And so when I finished my grad program, I went off to Walt Disney Imagineering and worked in their live entertainment division. And that group, Disney Parks Live Entertainment, does anytime there's a parade, anytime there's like Mickey and the Magical Map, or there's Frozen at the Hyperion Theater, or the Newsboys Run Down the Street. All of that is handled by the live entertainment division. Any character you see walking around. So it's really the life of the parks. It's the immersion of people to interact with. So what I did there was a lot of technical direction. I was a technical direction intern for them, and I did a lot of estimating of projects that are happening and being built by Imagineering.
So just to rewind slightly there. So with that job being like an Imagineer at Disney, is that something you would have had to have gone through kind of like grad school and stuff to get into? Like, is that kind of the gateway into that, or there are other ways of doing that?
There's definitely other ways of going about it. I think my graduate program was not a master's, and it was absolutely right for me. And there are people who get a master's degree that is absolutely right for them. And there are people who don't go to grad school, and that's absolutely right for them too. There's no one way, especially with such a creative industry, to get into what you're doing. I will say the type of internship I did, you had to be coming out. You either needed to be currently in school or just out of school. So I did the summer after and the 6 months after I had graduated. So that you need some type of academic institution to be able to get that internship. And that level was they have different levels of internships at Disney, and the one I did was it was called a professional internship, and that was very much geared towards people in a graduate level program, or involved some way that they're also like very connected to the industry, separate from just being a college student. So you don't have to, but you have to have some type of academic institution, and you got to be really, really focused on what you're doing.
Okay. So I guess, someone wants to access this kind of thing, they're going to have to, at the very least, have gone through college, even if they haven't gone to masters, kind of. Okay.
Yeah.
And while you're there, picking up kind of experiences with all like the theatre and stuff. So you were saying you were doing lots of welding and things. Okay. So when you joined like the company you're at now, what did you join in your current job, or have you kind of moved up in that since you got there?
So I joined at my current position.
Okay.
Yeah. So I started with my company in December of 2018. And it's the type of deal where there's um, the job that I'm at, I've gotten more and more responsibilities and larger projects, and that's to transition to a next level. And I was in talks for that when the pandemic hit. So yes, so I did start where I am where I started, but I have gotten a lot more bigger projects, and there's a lot of different opportunities that you can really latch onto.
Okay. So I guess kind of moving into actually what that's like doing kind of day to day. So you get to work. What do you do?
So understandably so, it's different depending on what phase of the production process I'm in, as well as what theater I'm at. So the company I work for is part of the League of Regional Theaters, which is this overarching organization that helps with union contracts, like collective bargaining agreements and all that fun stuff. Union contracts can be fun, I promise. Reading contracts. And so we have three. We have a LORT, League of Regional Theater, A, which is about 750 seats, and a LORT D, which is smaller, that's 350. And then we have one that's like an A plus, which means it's more of like a Broadway house and a touring house. So there are a lot of little things going on, a lot of details. So a normal pre-production kind of day is I go into my office, I roll in. Usually my first meeting's at 10. Sometimes it's not. So I'll usually, I know, we're very spoiled. I will say the theater industry, my company especially, as far as like work-life balance goes, is my company is really great about it and the industry is not. Okay. My boss is very chill about us coming in a little later if you don't have a meeting, and as long as all the work gets done, that's what matters, because there are weeks when you're in tech and you're spending 80 hours a week in the theater, like making sure it's all working. So if on the weeks when you don't have to be physically in the theater and it's just office and meetings and prep work, and if you can get that done faster or at different times, like do what you got to do.
But from the way you said that, that sounds like that's unusual.
That's a little unusual from a lot of companies, where there are a lot of places where they're like, if you're in pre-production, it's 9 to 5 and you are in the office. And then if you're in production, it is like, this is your tech schedule and you're doing, 14-hour days and sometimes 18-hour days, depending on what's going on. And it's just lots of hours without any kind of consideration. It's definitely changing. The landscape of theater and the work from home balance is changing, which is great and very much needed. But I will say I'm very fortunate that my company seems to have been at the front end of making those changes.
Okay, so I was going to ask this later, but since you kind of brought it up, I might as well talk about it now. So yeah. Obviously technology is changing quite a lot of things at the moment. So like, how is it actually changing what your job is like?
Yeah, so it's the live entertainment industry, as we are in a position where large crowds cannot gather. The industry itself is kind of dissolving around us. It will come back, but the funds needed to keep like people employed and keep these rental, like the rent for the venues and all of that together. There's so many different facets to making a show than just actors and costumes and lights. And there are dry cleaners that we send all of our costumes to, and that's at like the very base. And there are caterers. There are major caterers we use for opening night parties, and all of the restaurants that thrive off of a theater being open nearby, are all suffering very deeply. So it's going to come back, and it will take a long time, but we're fighting through it. I think the good thing about what's happening is we've realized what work can be done from home.
Okay.
And we can accommodate, those needs. So people who have kids, people who have chronic illnesses, who, can get the work done, but maybe can do it from home and not from dragging their butt to the office. I think we're going to come back with a lot more leniency towards what's actually needed to be done in person. which is going to be good in the long term, especially for theater when you do have those weeks where it's just super long weeks of many, many hours in tech, and you can balance that off with weeks where you don't necessarily need to even come in.
Okay. So I guess kind of taking that on. So if people can kind of work from home, is quite a lot of your job like you just kind of on your own working through stuff, or is most of it kind of working with other people? Like, how does that balance out?
Yeah, so a lot of my work is very much team-based. There are pieces like preliminary budgeting where I'm going to make the budget for the show of what I think all of these things will cost, based on the individual work of each team. Each like costumes will send me stuff, and lighting and sound and set will all send me stuff, and I will figure out how much I think the show is going to cost us to do and how long we need to do it. And then we'll all get together and talk about it as a whole group of like, okay, but do we really need this piece? And oh, we do. Props really needs that fancy couch. So set is going to give them some of their money because they don't need to spend as much on paint as maybe we originally thought. So it's a lot of conversation and balance and negotiating between teams. And at the end of the day, it's usually me being like, so I need everybody to cut 10% of their budget to make this work. It's so it's definitely that, and a balance with marketing and ticketing, who's dealing with our revenue. So it's a massive.
So do you sometimes feel like you're viewed as the Scrooge of your company, who's like demanding people do everything for less money?
No, I can usually blame the producer. Sometimes I'll be like, I just really need this to be a little bit less. Or like, do we need that fancy of fabric? What if we didn't make the entire floor out of carpet? What if we just painted some of it? So I actually recently had a show where the entire floor needed to be carpet that matched the theater's carpet. So that had me, they wanted to look like a conference room, and the theater was just a conference room, right? So we built these walls that matched the walls of the theater, the house of the theater, and carpet that needed to match the carpet of the theater, which was, when it was renovated, was an Italian design carpet that was shipped in from London. So I was running around at the end of the day, a few times trying to like make wire transfers happen between like international companies to get like $46,000 worth of carpet and to have it like airship to me to put into our theater.
Okay, so I've only ever bought like carpet for like a room, and actually no, I haven't done that. I'm aware of other people who have done that, and I'm just like, how much carpet are you getting for $46,000?
Upwards of 200 square feet. No, I'm sorry, much more than that. Much more than that.
That's very expensive carpet. Wow.
It was also very expensive carpet. Yeah. Maybe 2,000 square feet. I'm trying to remember how many square feet, but very large amount of carpet.
Okay.
Which since it matches the theater, we just rolled it up and put it into storage in case something happens to the theater carpet. But yeah, no, it's interesting. It's since the theater I work at is very much at a Broadway level, the budgets are crazy. It's not, there are community theaters who do amazing work, who work on essentially donations and what they get from ticket sales. And those are really amazing performances because you can see how much effort and time was put into building it and making it happen, even if it's not the most high tech. Yes. And then you go to a Broadway house like the one that I work at, and it is all high tech, and it is all, sometimes you throw money at the problem, and sometimes you throw time at the problem, and sometimes you just cut the problem from the show.
Okay, makes sense.
So there's a huge different scale of theater in every city. And I'm fortunate enough to have made my way up to essentially what the top is for Los Angeles.
Okay, so if I've understood it correctly, you spend most of your day kind of coordinating between different people in various different ways. So are you like in meetings quite a lot, or are you just kind of wandering over to someone's office and being like, you need to do this?
A little bit of both. Primarily meetings, because also in the production department and in having 3 different theaters to manage, I'm lucky that we have 2 production managers and 2 assistant production managers and a director of production. My immediate office team is about 8 people. So between all of us, all 8 of us, we handle running 3 theaters simultaneously. So I'm never alone, which is great. I always have somebody to bounce ideas off of and thoughts and to get my back and help me on the show and whatever needs to happen. And so that's really great. A lot of it is meetings. And we're also there's general overhead improvement projects. So making sure the safety manual is up to date and getting our team members OSHA certified so that they actually are doing the things safely that we need them to do. People don't think about theater being dangerous, but we're welding, we're lifting things into the air, we're using massive machinery and forklifts and putting turntables into places where turntables usually don't live. So it's the number one priority is always safety. So then there's the overhead of keeping everybody up to date and trained and focused on what they're doing.
Okay, so since you've mentioned welding several times, if if I have had a career where I've been a welder, but I happen to like theatre, would I be able to get a job at your company? Is it like a full-time welding job, or are they just contracted in?
We work with the union. So there's IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stagehands. I think I should know what that is. But yeah, so IATSE is the union we work with, and they have, if you're a welder, you're also doing carpentry. It's rare that you're just going to be welding unless you work at a scene shop and that is your job. So if you are a welder and you're great at it, you can totally get a job doing welding. It's not at my company, but there are companies where you can get a job doing just that for entertainment. No problem. You'll probably make more money, honestly. Like TV and film, a lot of the places have to build for TV and film. So there are scene shops all across Los Angeles. We actually work with one in Calgary, Canada frequently. There are a bunch of just commercial scene shops that build all the TV and film sets and theater sets and tour sets. So they need all of those amazing people that can do those cool stuff.
Okay. So you kind of mentioned most of your time you're basically a lot of your time you're in meetings. How many hours a day of that are we talking?
If I'm in pre-production, there's times where I'm in 5 to 6 hours of meetings a day.
Oh, shoot me now. Oh my God.
I will say our boss has gotten a lot better about it. It's just because we're just constantly moving, it's, you gotta be constantly talking to people and figuring it out. And so maybe it's more like 4 to 5. But then you get into the theater and you're sitting at your desk, which is a folding table that's been set up in the seats of the house of the theater. And you're just on your laptop sending emails while also keeping an eye on what's happening on the stage. And, people come over and interrupt you and say, hey, I got a question about this thing. Or, hey, this piece actually doesn't fit through the door like we thought it was going to fit through the door. So we did a show that had 2 full-size cars that needed to be on stage. And that particular theater it was going into is a circle. So it's just a little strange. It's an interesting theater. It's a really wild space. So then we were figuring out how to fit 2 full-size cars through our loading dock doors, and they fit by a 1/4 of an inch.
Couldn't use minis.
What?
Couldn't just use some minis or go for a bit smaller?
Apparently not. Apparently not. So yeah, so in these vintage cars, we need to shove through a space, and it just fit. Sometimes hey, can you look at this and make sure that I'm not going to break it? Be I can't guarantee you're not going to break it, but I can look at it. Or this thing is loose and whatever. I need you to, the amount of times it's hey, I need you to order more gaff tape or more paint or more, we had a show that needed 48 cases of lemon LaCroix. And so then I go to props and I say, I need 48 cases of lemon LaCroix, and they find it.
Oh, so you definitely a Shawshank Redemption reference here, but you've got some Reds in your team who can source everything you need.
Oh, very much so.
Okay.
The props team at any theater, they're the true rock stars. They make it all show up where I need it to.
Okay. So, kind of in your job, how much of it is kind of dictated to you by other people, being like, you need to do like X, Y, and Z, and how much of it do you kind of decide how it goes?
Depends. A lot of it, so I'm for the company I'm with primarily, Center Theater Group, I'm an assistant production manager. So I will fully run calls and their projects I will fully run, start to finish and be in charge of and budget and the whole thing. Our annual gala is my baby and from budgeting, I am taking full lead and I kind of am like, okay, and like, this is how we're doing it and this is how it goes. And I'm taking point. If it's a show that I'm assisting on, then it's a lot of my production manager being like, hey, can you do this thing? Hey, can you email so-and-so and get this sent to the theater? Or call this person and make sure the check is being sent. So it's the how I'm doing it is dictated by me. The what I'm doing is primarily dictated by my superior on the show. So it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
And depends on the situation.
Because I was just thinking, because I guess in that kind of industry, I feel like people who are quite creative would be drawn to it, but then people who are creative don't necessarily like being told, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. So I was kind of intrigued how that worked.
Yeah, it's I fortunately don't need to deal with the super creative people all the time. So like I deal with the designers and but I'm not in charge of the designers. If a decision needs to be made, I get to go to the producer and say, this is too expensive. And then the producer has to go to the designer and say, so if we need to like tone this back a little bit, like what would you cut? It's very much we work off of each other. And if like they need somebody to be the bad guy, they'll make me do it. And if I need somebody to be the bad guy, I'll make them do it. It's a balance.
Okay. Okay. So I guess, okay, so in your career, like what would be the next step for you?
Oh, geez. So based on the company I'm already at, the ideal would be to get either an equal position, like either a lateral move so that I'm at the same position or just one step up position at the level company I'm at. The struggle is that I'm 25 and I'm already at essentially I'm at one of the top regional theaters in the country. So if I want to move location, I need the same position at like a Lincoln Center or like the National, like for reference for London, like the National, or for here like Lincoln Center, or like a major company. So a similar position, or to get promoted within my own company, or to get, which would be ideal, or to be promoted but at a lower level theater. So it kind of depends which way I want to go. I can also jump ship from theater and go back to working at commercial at Disney or an entertainment group like that. So, or I can go try and get a job at a Broadway house. Broadway company, a production management company. So
Okay.
many options.
Okay. So I guess a question I would have is kind of so out of like the people you were at university with who are kind of doing the same kind of program and stuff, is it quite competitive to kind of get into like the actual job market once you leave college, or?
Yes. So I would say it's easier than being an actor. Like I didn't move to New York and do the audition thing, and that is not something I've ever had any desire to do. I have a lot of respect for the people who want to audition and like work it out, because that competition level is crazy. The people that I was at grad school with, because of fortunately the connections and the intense level of work that we go through at the Yale School of Drama, most of us, if not all of us, can pretty easily find a job.
Okay.
Doing what we want to do, just not necessarily, and then it depends what's open in the level we want to do it. I would say the particular program I was in was the Technical Internship Certificate at Yale, which is a 1-year program where I did carpentry and welding, and then I took classes. The people who came out of that generally go on to be props artisans or scenic painters or carpenters or, more specific, just highly skilled in those areas, versus I went onto a management track.
Yeah.
It is a little abnormal for me to have the position I have without more experience in the industry or a master's degree.
Okay.
So it's definitely competitive. I'm really fortunate to have the job that I do, especially for my age and experience.
Okay.
You froze for a second.
Yeah,
so I'm not
same
sure.
at this end as
well.
Okay.
I don't know what you heard last, but
so I guess because I don't really know anything about this, so like you were at Yale doing this, like are there lots of places that have these kind of programs, or is it kind of like quite a niche thing that you can get into?
Yeah, so there are a lot of places that have masters of fine arts in theater, in technical theater. Just like anything else, some are better than others. Some have more specific things than others. So some have specific programs in that you will get your Master's of Fine Arts in production management or technical direction versus just like general, right? So, but as far as this like 1-year type program, it's similar to an apprenticeship, but you also take classes. So Yale is actually the only place that I know that has this type of a program. I had no desire to go to grad school whatsoever. I was going to be a carpenter at a theater in New Jersey. And then one of my undergrad professors said, no, I think you should go to Yale and you should do this 1-year program thing. And I figured, I'll apply. The application's due in a week. I can say I applied to Yale. And then I got an interview, and then I got in, and I was kind of like, I think I have to go now. It sounds insane, but that is how that happened. I like sneezed, and I was like at Yale.
Okay, so it's not one of those things that you have to show up and be like, I've wanted to come here ever since I was a fetus. Because
right.
You hear other people who want to be doctors have been like, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to help people and I wanted to go to Harvard Medical School or, wherever it is. It's not so much like that.
Hit or miss. Some of my classmates were in their 40s and had spent 20 years as a roadie. And then there was me right out of undergrad being like, I kind of accidentally ended up here, but let's go. A friend of mine, his father had gone to the Yale School of Drama, so he knew about it from like the time he was born. It was like, this is the thing that like, this is it. So there's a mix of people.
Okay. So that kind of leads into a question in there. So what is the kind of age range like in your job? Is it like skewed towards like younger people, or is it genuinely like kind of a mixture of just about everything?
In the industry overall, it's definitely a mixture. There's, people right out of undergrad. There's people who didn't go to school at all that went from high school and they became carpenters or got trade skills and they're doing the thing. I would say some of most of our strongest tradies have been doing it for years and didn't need to go to undergrad because they're great at what they do and they love it. So definitely a mix. For my particular company, I might be the youngest one at the company.
Okay.
At 25, I started there when I was 23. At 23, I absolutely was the youngest in my department, potentially also the company, and other than interns, but for full-time staff. And I believe I may still be. So, and that's kind of just the level of the company that I'm at. Is a lot of is usually people who have been in the industry for a while and then ended up there. But I have no idea how I ended up where I am.
Okay. So you kind of mentioned that like quite a lot of the people you work with didn't go through the college system and stuff. Is that a significant amount of the kind of your side of the industry, or is it more common that people have kind of been through college and then come into it?
Or like working in the office, production, being a production manager, a technical director, props director, any of those folks have pretty much all gone to college. The people that have not have pretty much all gone to college. I'd say it's maybe 50-50 about whether they attended grad school or not. Again, there's no need to go to grad school unless you want to. And if you want to, great. And if you don't, that's also fine. There's definitely there are a lot of people who feel like, no, you must get an MFA to do this. And it's like, that's very untrue. You can do it without having whatever level of degree you feel that somebody else tells you need. You don't. There are people who I would say are like our staff carpenters and our overhire carpenters and props designers and props artisans, and stitchers and tailors, and electricians. That has definitely a wide range of people who went to college or didn't go to college. Those more trade skills are definitely not something you need. If you have a degree, great. But if you don't, also great. It's more like, can you hang and focus this light and plug it in and patch it? Great. That's all I need you to do. And if you can do it well and fast, like even better.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So I guess sort of thinking on one of the themes I'm trying to get at with the podcast is like, I know, imagine you're like 17, you're 18, you're about to leave school. You decide, I would like to get into technical theatre. What should they be thinking about doing now that they probably aren't?
Oh, geez. I think the biggest thing is just do as many shows as you can and just work on as many different things. So like, say you're like, I really want to be a carpenter. That's awesome. Go take a costuming class. If you really want to be a scenic designer, great. Go take a class in in lighting. The main role of production management is that we can communicate well and work and be a liaison between the different departments. And that it's only easier when everybody knows what's going on. So I feel like at the end of the day, we're all making one show. So if you are a carpenter who can pick up a wrench and like hang a light, that is great. Then you can like work with people better and understand what they're going through. So I think just keeping your options open as to what you want to do and to what you can do, and just getting as much experience across the different things as you can. Another thing I will say is that a lot of people are going to tell you need to go to summer stock. That you need to go work at a summer stock.
What does that mean? Sorry, I don't know what that jargon is.
Yeah, totally good. Sorry. There are a lot of places in the U.S., I assume also on your side of the pond, that where they do like summer theater. They do a bunch of shows really fast during the summer. There are a lot of great programs and you learn a lot from them. I personally never did summer theater. I never did summer stock. So I can't speak to that experience, but I think the fact that I've made it to where I am in my career without having doing summer stock, it's a great experience. And if you can do it, great. But also they're usually paid very poorly and they expect a lot of hours from you. And I personally worked every summer through undergrad as a waitress at the country club and like just made tips to pay for school, So I was never in a position to go and do summer stock, and I turned out fine. So like, if you can do summer stock, great. If you can't, it's not the end of the world. And like, don't let somebody tell you that you have to do something one way to get into this industry.
Okay, yeah. So I guess the big takeaway I'm getting from that is basically get as much as different experience as you can, but be realistic. Like you can't necessarily like do everything, kind of.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I guess the one final thing I would ask is like, what is something people should probably know about your job that they just don't because they've got no idea what you do?
That's That is a very good question. Yeah, no one really knows what I do, which is fair. I would say to understand that what you see on stage has so many more people behind it than you see on the stage. So for everybody who just watched Hamilton on Disney Plus, all of those actors are very important and are really talented. But there are hundreds of stagehands, of carpenters, of general managers, of marketing people, whatever, of production managers who also went into making that happen. And they are just as valuable to the process.
Okay, so that brings us to an end for this podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation and found a little bit more about what it's like being a production manager. If you want to find the next episodes in the series, I'm slowly in the process of adding to various platforms. So we're already on Spotify, on Stitcher, and when Apple stops rejecting it, it will be on Apple Podcasts as well. But I hope you enjoyed, and please do check out the future episodes if you want to find out about other jobs.